Welcome everybody to Shorebird ID Section 2. Tonight we're going to cover a lot of the birds that didn't fit into the calidris or tringa groups that we discussed last week. We're going to talk about plovers, some of the other sandpipers that didn't quite fit, Godwits, Phalaropes, and plovers, and Dowitchers. So there's a lot to cover, but we're not going to have quite the amount of attention to detail needed for a lot of these birds. So it should be a little bit of fun tonight. So in this group, you can separate a lot of them by their foraging behaviors. So a ruddy turnstone, for example, might flip over rocks and shells where it's searching for food along the beach. Purple sandpipers are going to cling to rocks, dodging heavy surf. Almost look like they're going to get swallowed up by the incoming waves, but then they emerge unscathed. It's a lot of fun to watch. Plovers are visual hunters. They're going to run, stop, look around, grab food, rinse and repeat. You can see those at a distance, and that, probably everybody's got a lot of experience watching killdeer. So all the plovers are going to feed in a manner that's similar to that. You can use those as a reference. These also will encompass some different habitats that you might not associate with some of the other shorebirds. So phalaropes you can see well offshore in the ocean or in some of the Great Lakes. The plovers are not always going to be by the water. They can be in fields. And the upland sandpiper is one that's almost never found near water features. And then the purple sandpiper, as I just discussed, is going to be hanging out, especially in the Great Lakes along breakwalls, areas that are covered in algae, have a lot of waves crashing up against the rocks to bring in food for them. And for this group, we're going to be able to look at plumage patterns again. So I'm not going to yell at you for using different colors and patterns to identify a lot of these birds, because they are going to be quite useful in several of the shorebirds that we're going to talk about today. So the first one's pretty familiar to a lot of people. It's the ruddy turnstone. These guys are fairly abundant along the East Coast, and they're very, very approachable birds. They're not too shy about beach walkers or people. Anything short of dogs, they're not going to be too terribly skittish. So you get to see them up close. When they're in breeding plumage, they're just beautiful calico pattern, black and rusty brown and white. The bill is pretty distinctive. They have a very short, stout upturned bill with a point to it, and they have these little ringlets on the face and also on the breast. It's a little obscure because it's very thick here, but look in here, because this is a pattern that you can use to identify these guys in the fall. And their legs are a bright orange color, so they're pretty striking, and that's something that's going to help you out when you see them in their more dull non-breeding plumage, which is this guy right here. So the back loses a lot of that calico pattern. It's more even. It's kind of a bronze and black look to it. They still have that ringlet look of black on the breast, and they lose a lot of the facial pattern that the summer birds have. You'll get some that are kind of transitional when they move through here in the fall. So some of those elements might be a mixture of both of these plumages, but the body shape will stay the same, and you'll notice that bill is pretty different than a lot of the sandpipers and birds that might be associating with this one. They tend to prefer open water, big stretches of beach. Not going to see them on mud flats too often, and they're usually in smaller groups. I haven't seen them in huge flocks or anything, but one, maybe two, three at a time. They're pretty abundant along the eastern seaboard. You'll see them in Florida a lot, and when I was birding North Carolina, they were pretty abundant. So they also have kind of a distinctive walking style that they bob their head quite a bit. And is everybody seeing the second slide with the non-breeding plumage?
No.
No?
No, I'm still seeing the cover slide.
Well, that's just fine. Okay, hold on one second here. Thanks for letting me know. All right. Everybody see this one?
I've got text on it. Nope, back to the cover.
Okay, so we got it now?
I've got getting started.
Okay, all right. So here's the first slide of the ruddy turnstone and breeding plumage. So sorry about that. Thanks for letting me know that the screen share is kind of strange on this program. All right, we'll start back over again. So notice the calico pattern on the back and overall look to it. And these, you see these ringlets here on the breast with the black and the stubby dagger-like bill that has a slight upturn to it. And in the breeding plumage, they have this round shape that goes through the eye. It's almost like a false eye, this white patch here. And then the bright orange legs. And then in your breeding plumage, you have this more even look to the back where it's bronze and black. The head doesn't have the same pattern, but you still keep some of the reference to that ringlet on the breast. The leg color stays the same on this bird. Does everybody see that one? Okay. All right, so this one is regularly encountered in the Great Lakes region. You can get them anywhere that there's a decent sized beach. You have the opportunity to see them. They're not that common, but if you're in the Lake Erie region, they're I see them on a regular basis down there. Jamie says I see them in Peely as well. So they're around. You won't see them in huge numbers, but it's one I would expect if you're getting out there shorebirding, you're going to encounter every year pretty much. So here's a fun one. This is one of my favorites. It's the purple sandpiper. This one is a species you're not going to encounter by accident, I would say. They come a lot later in the year. November is generally the time of year to see this bird. Typically, they're going to be found on the Lake Michigan side, out Muskegon, Grand Haven, and Holland is where they are frequently found on the breakwalls of the state parks out that way. And you do have to be careful. We've gone out there where it's been very, very icy, and you have huge waves on that side of the lake. That would be very dangerous if you were to fall in. So if you go chasing this bird, make sure you're paying attention to your feet and the waves and the wind conditions as well. Now they're pretty tame, so the good thing is if you go there, you're not likely to spook them. I've had bad luck where it's been on the other side of the channel in Holland twice that I've gone over there and hasn't given me real good looks. But watching them forage along the breaking waves is a lot of fun. So you'll notice that the shape of this bird is very round. It's got a short neck, got a longish bill, proportionate, that has that curve to it. The base of it's going to be orange. The legs are going to be orange. The overall color is not really purple per se. It has a little bit of a purplish gray tone, but the feathers have this nice white edging to them as well. And the wings are very short. This is a bird built for clinging to rocks, not long distance flight necessarily. So they'll be traveling in small groups in the Great Lakes region, 1, 2 birds, maybe 3 max. They Jamie, yeah, it's November. I've seen them in November. Every time that I've had the opportunity to go chasing after them has been in November. I think depending on what the ice conditions are, they can linger a little bit longer. I think Cleveland gets them sometimes in December on those pelagic trips that they run out of there. And so they're around depending on what the season holds for weather. I know a great place is Barnegat Light in New Jersey. You can see a lot of these birds overwinter there. It's a good spot to see them as well, from what I understand. I've never been there, but it looks like you get kind of a concentration of these birds, along with Dunlin and ruddy turnstones that overwinter in that area. But we won't generally see these in the breeding plumage. They're going to look like this, which is fortunate because I prefer this plumage actually to the breeding plumage, which has warmer colors, a lot more streaking, more white on it. Here's another cool one, the buff-breasted sandpiper. I know it was one of my trick slide quiz questions from last presentation, but this one is another sandpiper that's not always going to be the easiest to find. They tend to arrive sporadically, not in any big density, and they're not going to be in the same habitat as most of your shorebirds. So you might have to go to a sod farm to find these guys, or if you're lucky, you know, they might be in a park nearby, a lake or something. This photo was taken at Lake St. Clair Metro Park, and he was very accommodating, even with all the beach goers there. So you'll notice with this one, it has an overall buffy, warm tone to it, as the name suggests. The scalloping pattern on the back is very attractive. It is very clean, has a clean look to it compared to some of the sandpipers that have more of that scrubby. Sorry, I'm reading the chat here. You're still seeing, is anybody else having problems seeing the presentation, or is it just on me?
I've got it.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So this is one by shape that is a lot different than a lot of the sandpipers, with the head size and the bill length and the proportions. So it's really going to have more of a plover look to it, or maybe like an upland sandpiper, which I think is the next slide. So if you look at that, it has some of the same qualities in the shape of the head. It has that kind of bulbous round head, mid-length bill. This guy has a longer neck, longer legs, and the habitat's different. It does breed in Michigan, so you have the opportunity to go seek them out, but they're not that common. But they do prefer old fields, airports, anything that has a lot of open grassland. You can look for these guys. They tend to perch up on fence posts and places where they can get a high vantage point. So that makes them pretty distinctive in behavior from a lot of other shorebirds, at least that we encounter here, because they're not setting up on territory as these guys are. So they have an overall modeled pattern, this ubiquitous all over their head and the neck and the wings and the tail. It's not one that you're probably going to see in the presence of other shorebirds. So if you're out maybe looking for meadowlarks or sparrows in a field, you could see this bird, and it should help you ID them. I believe this species arrives in the spring, first week of May. They're usually on territory by the mid-migration in May, when we're getting out to the hot spots. I think they would get reported out at Wurtzman Air Force Base near Tawas by the time they have the festival every year. I've had them late in May at Willow Run. I was actually chasing a long-billed curlew that set down there, and didn't get that, but I did get the upland sandpiper. So they're a little cryptic when they're not perched up. They blend into their habitat very well, but they do have that sort of head bobbing look to them when they walk. But given that it's not likely to be found with a lot of other birds that look like this, the ID on it's fairly straightforward. So, as promised, we're going to get into the Dowitchers. Now, most of these birds are fun and easy to ID, but then we have the Dowitchers. And the analogy I came up with was basically being a prosecuting attorney, where you're putting together all this evidence for a conviction, and then you still lose the case. So you could put together all these field marks, and you're still going to get people that disagree with you on what the species is, for the most part. It's not impossible. I've spent a lot of the time focusing on the short and long-billed Dowitchers for this presentation. It's the one that I really wanted to give you a good sense of how to ID them. For starters, I'll say that the short-billed Dowitcher for our region is sort of the default bird to go with, and then work off of that. Now, I don't know if that's because they're more common or people just think they are, therefore they report them as short bills, and there's more long-billed Dowitchers going through that go unchecked, unreported. So for this bird, you're going to have a kind of stocky shorebird that's reminiscent of a snipe. So it has that kind of thick body. These guys have longer legs than a woodcock or a snipe would have. They have a kind of a rounded head and a very long bill proportionate to the head. Now the trick with these guys is the names kind of put you on the wrong path right off the get-go. So you have long and short-billed Dowitchers, but the bill length isn't something that's going to be diagnostic for these guys. So if you think about how Sharpshin and Cooper's hawks are, where the males and females are different sizes, you have the same thing going on with the Dowitchers. The females have longer bills than the males do. So if you have, but there is overlap between the two species. So you could have a female short-billed Dowitcher and a male long-billed Dowitcher that have a similar bill length. So it can throw you off there. They aren't always longer than the other. So you think about how greater yellowlegs have a longer bill than a lesser yellowlegs. It's not always the case with Dowitchers. Generally speaking, if the bill is proportionately twice the head length or longer, it's a long-billed Dowitcher. If it's shorter than 1.5, it's a short-billed Dowitcher. But there's a lot of overlap, so you're not going to want to rely just on that. So on this bird, it has a steeper forehead. It's a very subtle thing, but it's more squared off here. It doesn't have a smooth, rounded forehead. The base of the bill on these guys is probably my favorite quick field mark for separating them. If you look at the base of the mandible here, it flares out from the width of it along the rest of the bill. Everybody see how it sort of flares out when it connects to the head right here? When you get to the long-billed Dowitcher, it's more of a straight shot, straight into the head. It doesn't have that broadness to it here. So keep that in mind. Bill length, it's going to be approximately 1.5 times the length of the head, maybe a little longer. So it's hard to gauge that against the long bill. So I wouldn't use that, but it can be helpful when you're collecting your evidence to sort of make your case for which species it is. It has a thinner neck right in here than you see in the long-billed Dowitcher, but that can be affected by how long the neck is extended, how the feathers are laying, so that's hard to gauge as well. The weight distribution on the short-billed Dowitcher is more even, so it's not going to feel front-heavy like the long-billed Dowitcher does. And it's hard to tell when we have a second slide here, so it's not going to have this roundness to it right here. It's going to be sort of an even weight all the way across here. So behaviorally, these guys are unique because they adopt a sewing machine behavior where they put their head down and just jam that bill over and over into the mud to search for food. So they'll have their head in the water a lot of times, which doesn't help when you're trying to assess the bill length. The other thing you can look for, and this one's not all that reliable either, but it can help you in certain cases, is that the supercilium on those short-billed Dowitcher has an arch to it. It's not very flat. And that sort of factors in with you look at how steep the forehead here is. So that is why the supercilium can appear arched in some of the short bills that you see there. It has a distinctive call note that can help you separate them. It's the one diagnostic trait that these birds have. The short-billed Dowitcher has a double note flight call that sounds a lot like a lesser yellowlegs. The long-billed dowitcher has a longer, sharper, single note flight call that has more resonance to it because it's a slightly larger bird. The other thing you can look for is that the short-billed dowitcher has spots on the flanks. The long-billed dowitcher has more barring right here, and the short-bill has more spotting. Now, depending on the wear of the feathers, they can look a little bit different, and it changes over the course of the season as they shed some of the feathers and molt into non-breeding plumage or into breeding plumage, depending on what time of year you're looking at the bird. So that can be one thing you can use for your identification. If you look here, that's flared out at the base of the bill. It's a little thicker than it is down here. So that's a good way to, if you're looking at the shape of the head, that little bit right there and this right there be really helpful. So when we're looking at the long-billed dowitcher, that is more or less even right there. It doesn't flare out as much. So the whole length of the mandible is more even. The chevron pattern is going to be when the feathers wear away a little bit, into some of the barring on the long bill here on the flanks. So that's sort of an in between when it's the feathers have some wear on them, and they can look a little bit different. So they're going to be kind of in between a full bar and a spot. So if you start seeing chevrons in there, that can give you a clue. So on the appearance of and the shape of this bird, you have what a lot of people say is more front heavy. So you see it more pronounced here in the roundness on the back. It has a slight hunchback to it. And some people say, and I don't really see it in a lot of it, but it almost looks like it swallowed a tennis ball. So there's more weight distributed to the front of the bird. And if you look at the head shape, there's more of a round angle here. It's not as steep. And that is, you can see the evidence of that in the eyebrow is not as arched as it was on the last photo. So the base of the tip of the bill is more flat on the long-billed dowitcher. If you look at the previous slide, it's almost more round here. It's a very subtle distinction, but it is there in a lot of birds. If you look at the bill length, this one is a little bit longer than the bird that we saw on the last slide. But again, in the field, it's going to be tough to really sort out whether that's getting into the twice the head length range or not. You know, you're not going to see a lot of primaries projecting past the tail. They're usually about even, and the flanks have some barring here. Now, in breeding plumage, the Dowitchers have a lot of cinnamon and rusty tones in them, and the long bills have a little bit darker plumage on the back. It has more of an even darkness above, so there's not as much of these sort of buffy tones showing on there. It's a subtle thing, and again, depending on the wear of the plumage, it can help you or hurt you. It can either confuse you or give you some clue as to what you're looking at. This one, I think, breeds higher in the Arctic than the short bill does. So we're not likely to see them in their full breeding plumage for very long, if at all, in the spring. They're moving through pretty quick, and sometimes they're gonna really develop these attractive plumages after they've pushed through our region. So to compare these birds is a lot of evidence that you got to compile, and at the end of the day, you're still probably going to have somebody that disagrees with you. So it's okay. It's one of the harder ID challenges that we're going to face in the shorebird realm. But I think there's enough there on most birds that you can confidently say that it's either a long bill or a short bill based on some of those criteria. So it's a little bit more than adding up 2 or 3 different ID clues with this one. You're probably going to have to study it a little bit more. and pick up some more clues, because everybody's got a different way of sorting these guys out and identifying them. Some lean more heavily on the plumage, some are more shape focused, and it really depends on what works for you. If the distinction between the mandible width at the base is a little bit too subtle and you want to go on, what the edging of the feather tips on the scapulars are, there's other ways you can look at it. And I didn't go through here because I think it's just way too much to cover for our little presentation. But these are the clues that I kind of, in my research, was most helpful on sorting these birds out. But again, there's no shame in not knowing exactly what you're looking at here. They're a cool bird to come across no matter what. Now mixed in is this sort of oddball sandpiper here that we didn't cover last week, because I felt it really applied more to Dowitchers than it did yellowlegs. But really, the stilt sandpiper is a hybrid of the two. It has sort of that shape of a yellowlegs in a lot of ways. It has similar leg length, although I think their legs are a decent amount shorter than the yellowlegs. Not quite as bright. But when you see them feeding together, you might look at this and say, hey, this is a Dowitcher, because when they're traveling with Dowitchers, they adopt that sewing machine feeding style, which can really confuse you, especially if that bird has its bill buried in the water or the mud. It's a very distinctive bill that'll separate it from the Dowitcher. It's long and curved, not nearly as long as the Dowitcher, and not nearly as straight as the yellowlegs. But if you can't observe the bill, it's really kind of tough to sort these birds out. One real good thing that they give you, though, is this really obvious white supercilium. It's notable on both breeding and non-breeding plumages. Yeah, Laura, they adopt a different feeding strategy if they're with other birds that are not Dowitchers. They have less of that sewing machine feeding style, and they'll just kind of do what the yellowlegs are doing, or more probing like the sandpipers do. They don't always adopt that sewing machine style if they're apart from Dowitchers. It's a strange behavior that they have. Now this one I think is sort of underreported in our region as well. I don't think there's nearly the amount of them that pass through as some of the other we talked about last week, but it's a cool one to get. And once you have a comparison species with this one, it stands out from almost any other bird that it'll be near. So to review the head shape here, I have those three birds. So if you look here, see how narrow that mandible is here compared to this one? Head shape here is a little bit different because the feathers are laying flatter on there. So you wouldn't be able to use a steep forehead example on these birds, but you do see sort of that arch happening here. And it's obscured by the transitioning of the plumage on this bird. But flat tip is here, you got more of a bulbous tip here. And the curve on this bird is noticeable for the stilt sandpiper compared to the Dowitchers. But it's something that I'm still learning. I'm still putting together the pieces on it, and it was really fun to kind of really spend some time thinking about these birds, because they're not something that I ever really had a lot of opportunities to just sit and observe at close range, aside from maybe a handful of times with the short bills. Long bill, there's only a handful of times I've come across those guys. But if you get a chance to, they're a lot of fun to watch, especially with that sewing machine feeding style. So we're going to move from the long bills to the shorter billed birds. That's going to be the plovers. Now this is one that pretty much everybody's going to be familiar with, the killdeer, or as I've heard more than one people refer to them, killjoys. It's odd that a bird that has probably seen people most every day of its life getting raised on a soccer field or in a parking lot can be that terrified of every single movement. But that's kind of what these guys do. They'll ruin the party for you when you're studying some other shorebirds and you take a wrong step and they'll freak out and scare all the other birds away. So that's one way that you can ID them, is they have the call that sounds like they're saying killdeer. There are great comparison species for the other two that are in the group of smaller plovers, though. They're going to be larger. They're going to have that distinct red eye ring. The bill's going to be longer than either the semi-palmated or the piping plover. And they have the double neck bands on the breast and in the neck. And their distribution is very wide. So you're going to be all over the place. They're going to be on beaches. They're going to be in parking lots. They're going to be on soccer fields, airports, wherever there's suitable habitat, they're going to be there. And even sometimes when there's not suitable habitat. So they're a very abundant bird, especially in our region and I think throughout North America for the most part. But getting to know them and what their shape and proportions are can really help you with some of the smaller ones. So here's a semi-palmated plover. These birds have a very cute look to them because they have those large eyes, that small bill. They're a small bird overall. They have that sort of jittery feeding style where they're going to stop and look around and then scurry and then stop and look around and find something to eat. They got yellow legs. This is a juvenile here, which I've always had better luck seeing them on fall migration when they have this type of plumage than on spring migration. I don't know if that's everybody's experience, but for me, fall and late summer are more about shorebirds than the spring is. Could just be because I'm chasing warblers, who knows. But kind of a toss-up for me. I really like this plumage. It's simple and it's not quite as flashy as their breeding plumage. But for me, it looks a little different than a killdeer, and I think the fact that you can see the eye a little bit better is nice. They do have a dark cheek patch even in the juvenile or non-breeding plumage here, which you won't see on the piping plover. They got a darker brown overall than the piping, which we'll see later. And from some anecdotal reports, it has to do with how near the edge of the water this particular bird likes to forage. So the birds that are farther up on the beach where the sand is drier are going to have lighter tones. So like a snowy plover or a piping plover can have a lighter back to it than ones that might forage closer to the waterline. I don't know if that's ever been proven, but that was one of the explanations I heard for why the colors are a little bit different. So this is a kind of a transitioning bird. It shows some of the non-breeding and some of the breeding plumage. So you have that kind of dark band along the neck. You have some of the pattern on the head that sort of might give you the impression of a killdeer at first, but then you see the shortness of the bill, the orange base to the bill, and the overall size. It's going to separate this bird from the killdeer, as will the yellow eye ring. So this bird, when I first was learning him, it was kind of like a dwarf killdeer, and then you sort of start looking at, okay, well, it only has a single breast band, and some of the head patterns are different. And the bill shape obviously is one thing that gives it that cute look that the killdeer doesn't have. It's got a longer bill. Now this is one that is pretty famous in Michigan, especially you get up near Sleeping Bear Dunes where they have a decent amount of breeding birds there now. It's the piping plover. Overall, it looks lighter than the semi-palmated. It has some of the same features. It has that small bill with the orange base to it. It has the neck or breast band. In this case, it's a little bit broken here towards the center. It has more orangish legs instead of yellow, and the brown on the back is a lot lighter. It's a lighter tan. And you see this black forehead patch here, which kind of, to me, they always kind of look like they're slightly worried, or maybe that's me just being protective of them because everybody's walking their dogs near the nests, and you're always hearing about not disturbing the nesting areas. So that's the kind of the way the silly little way I think of them, with that little furrowed brow that makes them look like they're sort of concerned or worried about being found. and they can disappear pretty good on the beach when they want to. A lot of times they blend in very well. The other thing you'll notice about them is they have this bulging forehead. It's not quite as evenly round as some of the other plovers. So it really is really emphasized with that black forehead patch. And here is a non-breeding piping plover. You see a lot of those characteristics are gone. It doesn't have the orange on the bill. It doesn't have the forehead patch. It's got a more even beige gray tones to it. But it's gonna not have the dark cheek patch like the semi-palmated does. It's gonna be proportionately, I think, a little bit smaller as well. So if you line them up, you'll see that killdeer's got that red on the eye. It's got a longer bill that's black throughout. Doesn't have the orange base to it like these two birds do. Eyes are all large on all three of these birds for visually foraging. And you can see that there's the forehead patch on the. Oh man, I messed up the slide. Pay no attention to text on this slide. It's left over from last presentation. Sorry about that, guys. So we're gonna go into the larger plovers now. And in our region, we have two of them that you have to worry about, the black-bellied plover and the American golden plover. They're both pretty similar, especially in non-breeding plumage. So there's some subtle things that you're gonna wanna keep an eye out for. Now, when they're at rest or foraging, you're not gonna see the one giveaway that the black-bellied plover has in non-breeding plumage, which is these little armpit patches on the base of the underwing. They have a little bit of black there. That'll separate them from the American golden plover. But if you don't see them flying, or you only see them flying from the back, you might not have that. So you're gonna have to look at some of these more subtle clues. Now, the beak shape on this one is a lot more robust than the golden plover. You're not gonna see the exaggeration of golden tones on the head, the neck, and the back. It still has some, because they're very similar in breeding and non-breeding plumages. It's also a larger bird than the American golden plover by, I think, maybe an inch or so, but the proportions are gonna be larger overall. It's gonna give you, by comparison, it's gonna feel bigger. It's gonna seem more monochromatic than a American golden plover when you see it. It's gonna look just more or less black and white with subtle hints of that golden color that you see in the breeding plumage. There's some in here, but it's not nearly as dramatic as you'll see in the American golden plover. But the one key difference, if you're lucky enough to see these guys in breeding plumage, which is always fun because they're absolutely beautiful, is the white on the under the tail and on the back half of the belly. There's white here. The black does not extend all the way to the other side of the tail. American golden plover has the black that extends all the way to the base of the tail. So here's an American golden plover in non-breeding plumage. So you see, first off, you get that golden cap there. There's a lot more of that gold color happening throughout the plumage. Otherwise, it's fairly similar, but the beak is more slight. It doesn't have the even thickness. It kind of tapers down to a point. It's overall has a less robust feel to it. And in breeding plumage, it's got a lot more golden tones to it, and the black on the belly extends all the way instead of breaking right here as it does in the black-bellied plover, which is weird that the bird with more black in its belly isn't called the black-bellied plover, but it has more gold, so I guess it's fine. So when you're comparing these two, look at the bill shape and the golden tones primarily. This one has a little bit of a bulge here towards the tip that this bird does not. It's more of a thick dagger. And this one's, I don't know, more of a spear, I guess you could say. It doesn't have the evenness to it. It has a little bit of an up and down quality to the edge. So we're going to start getting into some of the oddballs. And this is the wimbrel. It's a type of curlew that comes through our region on very specific migratory routes. I think most people only ever see it at Point Mouillet and Taos and Whitefish Point on the regular basis. They can show up other places, but those are the kind of the hot spots for them. And it seems like they're concentrated over maybe 2-3 days over spring migration. And I think they follow a different migratory path on the fall trip. But you'll notice it's a large shorebird. Thing you're going to notice is that big curved bill. It's very dramatic. It's got even streaking throughout the body. It's mostly brown and white, and it has a very obvious supercilium and crown to it. These guys are very, very fun to watch, and if you get a chance to see them, it's one of my favorite birds. I just love the shape of them, and I think the first time I ever saw one of these was in California, and then I saw them in Taos last year. So the fact that they have that kind of range is also fairly interesting. But it's not a bird that is easily confused with pretty much any bird that we get in this region. The other curlew, long-billed curlew, has got a bill length that is so ridiculously long you would never mistake it for a wimbrel. The shape of it's totally different than pretty much anything we would come across here. Another large shorebird is the godwit. We generally have two species that come through here, the Hudsonian and the marbled. They're both very large. They're going to be larger than pretty much any other shorebird that you would come across. So the Hudsonian is, generally speaking, a cooler toned bird. It's going to have a lot of smooth grays and non-breeding plumage. The juvenile birds have an obvious white supercilium. The bill is long and has an upward curve to it. It's a little bit more dramatic in the marbled godwit, in my opinion, but again, it's probably not something that you could use to ID them as a diagnostic feature. But when they're in non-breeding, what you'll notice about the Hudsonian is that they're a very smooth pattern. The marbled godwit always has some sort of streaking and barring to it. Even in non-breeding plumage, there's going to be a kind of a messy look to the back. Whereas the Hudsonian generally has a more clean look to it. They're slightly smaller than the marbled godwit, I think about 1.5 inches smaller, but they're probably more, if they were side by side, you'd be able to tell a shape difference or a size difference for sure. Here's a Hudsonian godwit in breeding plumage. I think we generally see them on the northward migration, but that's just another beautiful bird that has a lot of those rich, rusty tones. But even in the breeding plumage, you see the streaking is mostly refined or found on the head. The back pattern is fairly clean even here, and then you get some barring on the breast and in the flanks, which compared to the marbled godwit, they kind of have that overall streaking barring all over the body that is not as clean looking as the Hudsonian. So the first thing you'll notice about this is the overall undertones are going to be brownish instead of grayish. They're larger than the Hudsonian godwit. They also have that two-tone bill that curves upward. It has sort of the pink base to it. They're going to lose some of this barring in non-breeding plumage, but overall you're going to have a streaky bird, large size upturned bill, and that overall ubiquitous streaking and barring that you won't see on the Hudsonian. So if you see a godwit that has a lot of smoothness to it, that's going to be a Hudsonian. And if it has a lot of streaking and barring and warmer tones underneath, that's going to point you in the direction of a marbled godwit. These guys are more of a western migrant, I've noticed, but you can get them here. I think the marbled godwit you can find in Florida pretty frequently as well. But we'll get both of them here on occasion. It's not something I would expect to see every time, but you know, it's one that'll pop up once or twice a year at some of the hot spots for shorebirds, depending on the season. Another really cool one is the American avocet. It's not really that much like any other shorebird that we have here in North America. It's got that very elongated, sleek look to it with that long neck, that round head, and that thin upturned bill. It's an absolutely beautiful bird just from a shape perspective. And again, it was one of these slides. It's like, oh yeah, that's my favorite bird there. I went through maybe 5-6 species in this presentation where I thought, yeah, no, that's the bird for me. That's my favorite. This one is non-breeding, so it has more of a black and white look to it. It has the obvious white wing patch on its overall black or dark brown wings. It has bluish color to the legs. Very tall, very long, thin neck. Proportions are very, very slight and svelte. And in breeding plumage, yeah, that's just a gorgeous looking bird. That rusty tone that gradiates out into white. Just something about the gradient there that's just really, really pleasing to the eye. And the shape of that bill is just really, really interesting. And it's thinner than the godwit, not as long, not as robust, and probably more dramatically tilted upward. So you're probably not going to mistake that for many other birds that we get here. It has short wings. They don't go much past the tail tip. But at that point, I don't think those little subtle shape differences are gonna tilt you one way or the other on identification. It's just it's a cool bird. We don't get too many of them here, but we'll get them on an annual basis as well. I know we had one at Mouillet that stayed the summer. That was the first time I ever came across one, and that was a cool bird. They're a little bit larger than you'd think. That was my first impression of them. They're not. They're going to be a step above the yellow legs in size. Another one that's very fun to look at is the black-necked stilt. This guy has just ridiculously long pink legs. They're just, it probably seem like they're twice as long as they need to be, and then some. They're bubblegum pink. You got that striking red eye with the black and white pattern. Everything above is black, everything below is white. Yeah, thin bill that's mostly straight, slight upturn to it, but compared to the avocet, not anything notable. It's just a cool eye-catching bird. We have those that have been nesting at Howard Marsh, I think, every year that it's been open. You can see half dozen of these in a good day there. And there's really nothing else that looks like this bird that you would come across. So yeah, if you're lucky enough to see one, good for you. It's just a fun bird to watch, and just the proportions of it are just so ridiculous. You can't help but laugh when you see the extent of the legs. They don't always get to, because they're going to forage in deeper water than some of the other shorebirds. So that can also help you at a distance. Pond poodles, huh? I'll have to get back with you on that, Laura. Why do you call them that? Yeah, I think very noisy. Yeah, we're fortunate enough to have the breeding population starting to take hold in the Great Lakes region, but other parts of the country they're more abundant. And man, I'm a little jealous that some people can just walk right up and spend time with these birds. But yeah, if you get a chance to check these out, they're a lot of fun. Now, our final group here are the Phalaropes. Now, these are sandpipers that are going to really distinguish themselves because of their behavior. They spin around like tops, stirring up food. They're more aquatic than any of the others. and you can find them far offshore. I've gone on some pelagics and seen redneck phalaropes out in the sargassum weed, maybe 7-8 miles offshore. Same thing with red phalaropes. We're on a whale watch out of Bar Harbor, Maine, and we came across some females in breeding plumage last summer, and yeah, they're really cool. The shape is similar to almost like maybe a solitary sandpiper for comparison on size and the shape, but they have a thinner bill. The redneck phalarope is going to be probably most often confused with the red phalarope at a distance, but the way you would separate these two is it has a black dark to the dark cap with a dark cheek patch, but the back is streaked. It's not a smooth, even tone, and you'll see some of the leftover plumage there from the breeding plumage, which will be on the next slide. It's just a very, very striking pattern to it. And the cool thing about phalaropes is that the females actually have the more colorful plumage, which is pretty rare in most birds. But in this one, it's just very eye-catching. You get the bright white throat, you get this rusty red tone on the neck, and then the dark face and head with that slight little white eyebrow and the gray back with a little bit of that buffy tone mixed in. So when you look at the non-breeding bird, some of that's still there. You have this cheek patch emerging, but there's some of that rusty tone still left over in the neck, and you get this kind of goldish color that mixes in with the black feathers on the back, which you won't have in the red phalarope. Now, the Wilson's phalarope is a bird that actually will nest in our region. I think Howard Marsh also had these, and a little bit further west, there's more of them. The population density is higher. But proportionately, the Wilson's phalarope has a smaller head. The body appears bigger than it does on the redneck phalarope. So this one has like a big head compared to the body. You look at this one, the head's much smaller. And you have this sort of faded tone to the pattern that you see in the breeding plumage. So there's this eye line that continues down the neck. It makes almost this S shape. And it has this bright red, gray head, and then that combination of reddish brown and gray on the back with the smaller head and the large body and a lot more white. You see here this bird, so got a lot more gray tones to it, and the pattern is a lot different. You have a lot darker head. So that tritone head pattern in the Wilson's phalarope is very interesting and can really help you separate this one from the redneck phalarope. But if you see a bird breeding in this region, it's definitely going to be a Wilson's. The other two are high Arctic breeders. So the red phalarope is a bird that we don't see nearly as often as the other two. This one, I think the only reliable place that I know where people kind of seek them out is at the foot of the Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron. They do some sea watching, and they'll catch one of these from time to time out there. Now, this one almost looks like a miniature gull at a distance. It has that smooth gray back. But compared to the redneck phalarope, it's got a blunt bill. It's a lot thicker and it's a lot shorter. The eye patch, or the cheek patch here, not nearly as distinct. But when you look at a breeding bird, it doesn't look much like the other two. It's a lot more robust. The bill's shorter. The shape of it is not as sleek. It's a lot thicker, and the patterning is a lot different. It still has that rich red, reddish brown to it, and this one has like a white mask. But we don't see them too often in breeding plumage. So when we see them, they're generally going to look like this, mostly white, almost like a miniature gull with that short bill compared to your red-necked phalarope. So comparing the three, your red phalarope's got that short, stubby bill. Doesn't have quite the crown on it that the red-necked phalarope has. Proportionately, the head's going to be about the same, maybe a little bit bigger to the body. The Wilson's phalarope has the smallest head proportionate, longest bill, and not as distinctive a cheek patch here. So, all right, we're going to get into the quiz part of it. If anybody has any questions before we get into this, now would be the time to ask them. I'm going to unmute everybody. So if you have anything you want to talk about before we get into the quiz, otherwise I will start here with the sandpiper. All right. Does anybody have a guess on this one? You got the rounded head, short bill, overall warm tones throughout, and that really attractive scalloping pattern to the back and wings. Anybody got a guess on this bird?
Buff-breasted.
Anybody else agree with that?
I'm gonna guess upland.
Yeah, the answer is buff-breasted.
Yay!
Good job. All right, so we got a small plover here. Orange base to the bill, yellow legs, yellow eye ring, dark cheek patch, overall darkish beige back without any pattern on it. Anybody got a guess on this one?
Am I?
Semi-pollinated.
Semi-palmated?
Yeah, semi-palmated.
Correct. Very good.
I couldn't record it. Oh, shoot, I should
All right.
have.
This one almost doesn't need any explanation. Anybody have a guess on this one?
Oh,
Still.
black neck still.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, see how far those legs extend beyond them when they're flying.
Wow.
They're just silly looking.
Oh yeah, yeah. They look a lot like those.
They're
And the
great.
color,
Yeah,
that leg color.
yeah. It's a great bird. They're just a lot of fun. All right, how about this one? It's just, well, it's swimming. Just to give you a clue about what group it is. It's got the streaked back with the
Red fellow.
The knot, or the, yeah.
Phalarope.
Phalarope.
All right, which one would you say this is? Streaked back. It's not a smooth gray back. Dark cheek patch and cap. And some of the rusty tone in here.
Red.
Red-necked.
Red-necked.
Redneck. Yep.
Yay!
All right, how about this one?
Purple sandpiper.
Purple sandpiper.
That is so cute.
Of course.
Purple sandpiper.
Hey, Jamie, this is what they look like. I don't know if you're wondering. This is kind of how they look.
You're a cruel man, Joe.
Is this your picture, Joe?
What's that?
Is that your picture?
This one is, yeah.
That's
Aw.
sweet.
Yeah,
Nice.
there's some I had to pull. Unfortunately, just like I don't have a lot of breeding plumage phalaropes and godwits and that, but yeah, this one is one of mine. He was, yeah, the 40-mile-an-hour wind gust was trying to toss me into Lake Michigan too.
You couldn't do it.
Ooh, yikes.
The camera's too expensive. Don't do it.
Yeah, I can't do it. All right, how about this one? Yeah, that short dagger bill,
Little Plover.
orange legs,
Buff-breasted.
and ringlet.
No.
Overall, kind of bronze and black wing pattern.
It's that white.
Oh,
The white giveaway.
There's a few of you who actually saw this exact bird in September as well.
Buff-breasted.
was the mommy one.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, Ruddy Turnstone.
Ruddy Turnstone, yep.
Oh, it's
Wow.
a turnstone. Mm.
Oh, that was, yeah.
All right, so there's one of your large plovers. But which one? So take a look at the bill. What do you think about the bill? What do you think about the overall pattern on the back and the colors? Which one do you think it is?
Golden,
Golden.
black belly, golden,
You got 50-50 shot at this one.
golden.
Black.
Black bellied.
All right, I heard both. We got to get a tiebreaker in there.
Black bellied plover.
Golden.
Black bellied.
Oh, we're tied.
Golden.
All right, well, it is a black-bellied plover.
Oh,
I can see why you would think it's got a little bit more golden tones in the cap there than on the birds that we showed in the slides, but that bill, see how it has that little bit of a round qualities to the tip of it?
Because the belly is really shadow.
Yeah, it's not the best photo, which is kind of why I picked it to give you a little bit of that's raw. No, I didn't have a better cut. All right, guys, you have to show me how much you paid attention. This is a Dowitcher, and that's all I'm going to tell you.
I'm guessing long billed.
Mm,
short bill.
Long bill.
Long build.
All right, okay. Does anybody want to give me a reason why you think it's a long bill?
Look at that lower bill.
Yeah, there's no flare there.
Yep.
not spoon shaped.
Darker back.
All right.
But the head shape was it is long. Okay.
But yes, you are right. It is a long bill Dowitcher. Very good. All right. How about this one?
Oh,
Yeah, so pretty. Mm,
Phalarope, redneck.
Oh, there's a little.
I'm not giving you any clues on this one. You guys are killing me. So.
Here we go. It's a Phalarope.
It's a redneck
Well, it looks kind of like a miniature gull.
Yep.
But I didn't write down who. Yes, red phalarope.
I like it.
Oh, yeah,
The red Phalarope. Bill is a little bit shorter. Does not as thin as the redneck Phalarope. And also look at how smooth the color is on the back. It doesn't have all that streaking and the different colors. The smooth gray and the cheek patch and the cap are not nearly as well defined. All right, how about this one?
yellow one.
So,
Look at
I
that
just
droopy
give you
bill.
most of the clues on this one.
Look at a droopy bill.
You got a long drooping bill, and it's got a bright, noticeable supercilium here.
Yeah. Okay.
Stilt sandpaper?
Remember?
Yeah.
Sherry, was that you?
Nope.
Oh, that was Marie.
All right, very good. Stilt sandpiper.
No.
Yep.
Stilt.
That long curving bill and the white supercilium give you your first clue. Has the yellow legs, but yeah, that head is fairly distinctive in that bird. All right, Dowitcher.
There's a picture.
The medium bill Dowitcher.
Medium.
Casprey.
I don't think that's a
Says-
choice.
I think short billed.
All right, who called short billed?
Me. It looks like his the bill flares out.
Who is this? It just says iPhone on mine.
It's Colette. I took one of Jamie's classes.
Okay, well, I just want to give you credit, Colette, because it is a short bill Dowitcher.
Yay!
So if you look, it has a little bit more of a flare to the base of the bill, spotting down here, and the bill is definitely not twice the length of the head, so it's not a female long-billed Dowitcher. You can check that one off your list. So, yep, this is a short-billed Dowitcher. All right, and that's it for the quiz slides. This one has some of the same resources we talked about from the last presentation, but there is a podcast, a little 15-minute MP3 that is specific to Dowitchers that I listened to a few times that was really helpful on those. And there's also Kevin Carlson, who is one of the authors on the Shorebird Guide, has a whole page about how to sort out Dowitchers there. That is also good to kind of cross-reference. There's a lot of detail on that one, and plumage differences and all that good stuff. So if you get a chance to check that out, if you really want to delve into the Dowitchers, that's a good place to start. And then, again, All About Birds has the slides that you can pull up to compare. Use that for the Godwits especially, because a lot of the guides don't have a lot of detail on those.
Good, Joe.
So thank you all very much for turning out this evening and checking out the Shorebirds once again. And yeah, thank you.